Yeah, okay. And I will post this out on YouTube. So if you guys, and I'll put it with Pixo's name on there as a hashtag. So if you go to YouTube and you're searching for it, you should be able to see the recording. So you guys, welcome. I'm glad you guys are here. I love to see the enthusiasm. All these people are excited about technology and business and curious. And that's awesome. That's what the IoT Curious Meetup is for. We're here at the Nest, so I do want to do a couple of thank yous. One to Andrew for letting us use the space, which is awesome, and all the help because he is the videologist here. I also want to do a thank you to our host tonight, who is Pixo, who's going to be speaking. So we got Jason here, and we have Danielle here, and they furnished the pizza and the drinks. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm excited about tonight's topic. So this is going to be about hardware and IoT and lessons learned. Jason's going to be our speaker, but I thought before we start that, what we could do is maybe go around and introduce ourselves. So just be, hey, here's my name. Maybe if you're interested, what you're interested in, if you want to talk about maybe what you do, however you want to introduce yourself, feel free to do that. I can kick it off and just say I'm Shannon Duvendak. I am a technology enthusiast. I have been doing this for a while. I love being here. I do have a day job, and so I work in large manufacturing is really what I do. So anyway, I thought we would start with the people online,
okay,
and then we'll go around the table. Okay, so if that's okay, Gabrielle, if we could have you maybe start and just introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Gabriel Weinkoop. I'm in Galesburg, Illinois. I am. Yeah. Is everybody able to?
sorry, 1 second. Let's change.
Sorry, I need to change my settings.
Sure.
Okay, let's try that again.
My name is Gabriel Weinkoop. I'm in Galesburg, Illinois. I'm an entrepreneur. My sister and I have started an allergy-friendly ice cream business, or frozen treat, really, technically is what it's called. That's been going for a couple of years now. We have a building we moved into in December. And I am also looking to get into some other more technical fields. I've been a steel worker for a while, and I'd like to get into RFID tracking of high value assets down to the shelf level. So looking to get into this.
We can help you with that.
Yeah, you might want to try.
Excellent.
Too. You used to work at T-Mobile. There's some really cool cellular trackers.
Cool.
Okay. And then it looks like we got Elijah. Are we like a big speaker or something?
Yep.
Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Hi.
Everybody, my name is Elijah Stallings. I'm a Bradley student. I should be graduating December 17th. My major is interdisciplinary innovation, and within that,
Yeah.
Thank you. Within that, I'm a musician as well as an entrepreneur. I have an investment company, so I mix music, business with finance and entrepreneurship. So, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Very cool. I'm a Bradley alum twice, so yeah. Okay, great. Maybe we can do the. There you go. Andrew's driving.
Hi, my name is Marcos Hashimoto. I am the managing director of the Turner School of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Bradley University. And I'm just curious about IoT and this technologies. Yeah, I'm kind of like it.
Hi, my name is Tanner Markley. Recent migrant to Peoria. Work for a commercial real estate company in Austin. Develop mostly self-storage and hotels and apartments. Lightly delved into software development and incorporating Internet of Things into some of the buildings. So here to learn some more.
There's a lot of use cases with that.
Yeah.
I work at that T-Mobile with my partners to
Okay.
Lucas. I work for OSF Innovation here in town. Also a transplant. I've been here for 14 years, so I don't, not quite a recent transplant, but help work with Andrew and Nathan and Shannon and John Ingalls and many people about distillery labs and helping to do more in the greater Peoria area, launch new businesses.
Hi, I'm
Cool.
I work for Generator, which is based out of Madison, Wisconsin, but believe me, I'm a lifelong Peorian, and the work that I do for Generator is here in Peoria. So I'm a managing director for G-Beta, formerly the director of G-Beta Distillery Labs. So we run the startup accelerator here for early stage businesses, and hope to launch them through Distillery Labs programming and with the support of Andrew. We do some pretty awesome stuff, so get all of me too.
Hi, I'm Trisha. I've been in Peoria for about a year.
I'm sorry, I gotta fix, let me fix this real quick. Is it the audio still?
Mute your.
It is. This video.
No, the speaker. Your speaker
Oh,
needs to be
gotcha.
muted.
Hold on just a second. Where's the speaker at?
Did you mute the speaker?
Or put the camera in front of it.
It was already muted.
Oh, I just. Okay, perfect. Sorry, Patricia, go again.
Right. I'm a software engineer at Purchase, and stuff either breaks when I look at it or stops breaking when I look at it. And I've been here in Peoria about 10 years since I graduated from Bradley. And did I say VirtuSense? I work at VirtuSense on the VST Alert product, which I think counts as IoT. So I'm here to see if there's any IoT stuff I don't know yet that I want to learn about.
I'm John Ingalls. My wife and I own Smiley Graphic Studio. My wife does package design and branding, and I do web development, primarily in the commerce space. And then we also have a passion project called Wild Routed, where we have graphics that inspire humans to connect with nature while we give back 10% of the national parks. So it's t-shirts, stickers, and such. So that's it.
My name is Prashant Sankran. Work at Panamatic Corporation. We make coffee brewers, if you don't know that. Commercial ones, not too much into the one side of things, but commercial coffee brewers, juice machines, dispensers, and all that. And believe it or not, those are all IoT machines in themselves. So, so have had quite a bit of journey with it, and I'm interested in learning anything and everything about IoT. Talk to as many people as I possibly can. Spoken to quite a few of new IoT solutions that people have been coming out with, so I'd like to try to keep up with it.
My name is Gene Franks. I'm a partner in a company that builds communication gear for first responders and occasionally military teams and that sort of thing. So we do IoT in the sensor world mostly. There's all sorts of chemical, biological, or radiological sensors that are used extensively for sporting events and things like that. And we make a lot of the glue that hooks those together. Oops.
My name is Andrew Nui. I'm the Director of Innovation and Startups at the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council. So we're very glad to have you here. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm gonna plug our next event on the 21st, which is a really big startup showcase event called G-Beta Distillery Labs Showcase. That's going to be at the Scottish Rite Theatre here in Peoria. We'd love to have you attend. It's going to be exciting. And without further ado, I'll pass it back to Jason.
Very good. Well, thank you all. My name is Jason Berg. I'm one of the co-owners of Pixo, and we're based out of Urbana. So thankful to be here with my colleague Danielle. And I love this setup where we get to drink beer first and then talk later. I don't know why everybody doesn't do that.
You might get another one, you drink while you're talking.
Yeah, maybe I will. So today we're going to share some of our expertise through a couple different project examples and some stories. But to give you a sense of perspective on like where we sit kind of the IoT world, Pixo is about a 20-year-old company. We're a women-owned digital consultancy, and we focus on a couple different things. We're known for building well-researched software and web applications and complex websites. And most of our work focuses on putting people or the users of our software kind of front and center in focus of our work. And so I'll spend a lot of time talking about it today. For more than 20 years now, we were started in 98. We've been focusing on really like untangling tough problems in like content, in code, in design, and our kind of major goal for most projects is really to empower our clients to expect more. And it's hard to say that in a different way, but it sounds sort of like a pitch, and it kind of is. But the thing is that most folks who have had a website or a piece of software, they've had bad experiences. People have had more bad experiences with software than they've had good experiences with software. And so part of our work really is to try to change that paradigm over like what would having a good piece of software actually look like and feel like. And so we do this in part by really valuing research and user interviews over just assumptions about how the project should go, clean code and engineering flexibility over just a blind efficiency model, and really focusing on relationships rather than processes as part of our work. So more specifically, we combine UX or user experience, research and design with full stack engineering. And there are other companies that do this, but not a lot do it well and do it consistently. And so by melding these two functions, we find that we and our clients really take advantage of a lot of the feedback, client feedback, and early learning that happens when you get iterative versions of software out into the public. And if you don't have a UX person integrated with your team, it's really hard to sort of help pivot. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. It's hard to pivot a project because you have specs and everybody's moving forward and we have a schedule and we want to make this. And any idea that says, maybe we should rethink how this is working or the workflow, it makes engineering teams cringe. So, and most folks, you know, when we think about engineering, most folks really understand the benefits of agile development. And a few teams really combine that with a lot of the UX methodologies into kind of one team. And, you know, agile is there to ensure that you're only focused on building valuable features that your users need. But by integrating UX, we're ensuring that those features, those valuable features, have a focus on the user, and so that they match those users' expectations and their context. So, you know, that's kind of like Pixo as a company. So I hope from that standpoint, you guys understand where we're coming from. But I also, you know, I'm a Midwestern guy. I'm kind of humble, so I thought maybe people want to know like why they should listen to me personally. Like what do I have to bring? So I just thought I'd share a little bit about my background. So over the past 15 years, I've been working in software for small companies and medium-sized companies. We're talking about what a large company is, so not a large company. But I started off in the publishing field, and my first software venture was targeted at publishing. It was a digital asset management tool. So I played both like a product owner role and like a VP business development role for that new venture. And I spent some time, there was a company that had been around for about 15 or 20 years, and they had a publishing platform that they were trying to sell to K-12 schools as a writing platform. Like, you know, K-12 focuses on teaching reading because writing is really hard to measure. And so it was a way to sort of help facilitate some of that writing instruction that's a little bit harder for folks to do. And then I spent some time consulting with, and then finally worked with Wolfram a few years ago when there were about 500 employees. And so there's two things I miss about Wolfram. One is they had a soda fountain machine on every floor that you could go. And two, Puerto Rico happened to be in my territory, so I got to go there. And I really wanted to go back, but alas. So in 2015, I moved over to Pixo, and right now I focus on helping both startup companies and established companies who are thinking about digital strategy. They have a new product or an existing product, and they're really trying to figure out how to set the team, where to focus their energies, where to invest, and those kinds of things. So that's been really fun. And so to tell the story that I want to tell today, we have to push the boundaries of IoT a little bit into projects that involve hardware and software integration. So we're focused on the software side, but a few of these projects aren't IoT specifically, but they all are typically, they have some sort of hardware component. It's just typically something that people touch rather than something that you squirrel away. So, and one final note, most of the projects that we work on have very strict NDAs and written by very large corporations. And so we have done tried to do a good job of making sure that we don't say any of these names. And if I slip and say a name, it's probably because we don't have an NDA, it's fine. I will not say the ones that we're not supposed to say. So I hope I haven't put anybody to sleep with all the context settings. Thanks. All right. So this evening I want to focus on 4 principles that guide our software development. And these are there to ensure that our software is usable and adaptable. So those are the main things we think about. So 4 things. 1 is talk to real users. 2, test out ideas before development. 3, design systems for flexibility. And 4, build systems iteratively. So I'll go through each of those. And this isn't a comprehensive list by any stretch of the imagination. It's just simply 4 areas that we see companies consistently getting wrong. And so that's where I want to spend some time. And these are hardware and IoT projects, but actually everybody gets these wrong. So first off, the first principle is talking to real users. And this is surprisingly controversial. It might not be surprising to you, but it's surprising to me always that this is a big deal. But there's really no substitute for getting in the field and talking to a real user and seeing how they do what they do. Most of the value of this exercise comes from seeing them do their own thing in their own way, and then asking clarifying questions about how did they arrive at this process, or how did they get there. This is not marketing or market research by any stretch. We're not asking, what they want to see in a new product. We're not asking, would they buy this? And we're certainly not asking if they would like how much they might pay. And there's a place for some of that work, but this is not what this is. UX is really trying to figure out who the user is, not what they will do. And most people, as many of you might know, if you ask them what they're going to do, they will say lots of different things. If you ask somebody, how many times are you going to go to the gym next week, it'll probably be 3 or 4 times. If you ask them how many times they went to the gym last week, it would be surprising if that number matched. Just because there's what we want to do, there's the vision that we create for ourselves and what we hope to do, and then there's the reality. And so UX really does focus on what's the reality of the situation, not what they hope for or want for. So when we think about creating a user interface, we really want that user interface to feel immediately familiar and obvious to our end user. And to pull that off, though, is incredibly difficult, as many of you might know. The users have always been annoyed by bad software and bad user experiences. But now that most of them have seen what good software and good user experiences look like, they don't want to go back. Nobody wants to go back. It's sort of why I don't buy really expensive ones, because I don't want to have to cross over and then not want to come back. So, and I've been thinking about this, about user expectations, in a slightly different context lately. I've been preparing a staff training on how to identify and not click on a phishing email. Mostly it's because we're getting new insurance and we have to have a training. So I'm making the training. And mostly I'll show videos, but I have a few things I'm working on. But I was thinking about this, and I'm really unashamed to admit, even though like I've been on high alert for phishing emails for over a decade and can catch most of them without even opening the email, I really almost got fooled by one last year. And you know, I could blame any number of things, and you all would believe me because you're kind people. But the truth is that this email was just very, very well done. It was just perfect email. You know, it focused on something that I would have cared about, and it was designed to feel like this official communication from a web service that I used. And so I clicked through, and I got all the way to this fake password prompt, and was about to put in my password. But I noticed that there was just one of the logos was either just slightly off, or maybe it was slightly out of date. I don't know. I mean, it was very good, but there was something that piqued my concern. And so I went back and looked, and sure enough, like I had just blindly sort of clicked into this thing. And so that, you know, it was just so interesting that just a few pixels difference, you know, on the very last step of this scam was the difference between me giving over my information and me not doing it. You know, it was the last step for me, but I imagine it would have been like the very first step for whoever was trying to scam me. I've gotten busy trying to make my life complicated. And I tell this story just simply to illustrate how attuned users are to how things are supposed to work. You know, you can create an app that is, you know, perfect in functionality and everything it's supposed to do, and it does it well. But if you introduce a non-standard navigational element, or you fail to put labels where they should be, or you just forget about error and status messages because they tend to be the last thing people think about, then it really can affect people's experience of your entire app is now shaded by some of these things. And fixing them costs money, of course, but the sort of like effort to cost ratio is so beneficial to making some of these things happen, that it's at the very least it's a lost opportunity. A good example of this, we were working at a steel mill a couple of years ago. We had one of our folks worked at a steel mill, and they had a ruggedized scanner with an embedded UI in it, and they needed to replace it. They needed to update the hardware, and so they couldn't run their old software on this new one, and they didn't know the new software, so they hired us. And it was an interesting project, and we had a lot of fun working on it. But I just want to talk about the status message. So when they would be out in the field, they'd be scanning different pallets of things to load onto trucks. And every time they would operate the arc furnace, it would knock out the Wi-Fi in the area. And so for a few minutes, the people who were using this app, you know, couldn't access it. And so they would, you know, get in the little vehicle and they'd drive all the way up to the main office, and they would say, this is broken. And the guy had a replacement one, so he just gave him that one and just put that one on the thing. Because he knew that it was working, it's just that it was temporarily out of commission. And so we did a lot of fun things on that project, but the main one was whenever that Wi-Fi went down, a banner popped up on the app and said, Wi-Fi's down, you know, wait a few minutes or whatever. And so just the amount of time that we've saved just by one simple fix of notifying people what's happening and setting their expectations correctly saved a bunch of headache and a bunch of time for this one company. And so, you know, as a side note, this is interesting about steel mills. You pay the cost of the steel when you arrive to pick it up, not when whatever cost it when you ordered it, which I thought was like really fascinating. Like, what are the business models? Like, I order this thing, but then like the price changes all this time, and then it's whatever it is when I pick it up. So,
Healthcare.
oh, healthcare. Yeah. Yeah. So a common alternative to talking to real users is to test out your prototypes with just internal audiences. Or worse is if you hire some sort of quasi-internal expert as a consultant to kind of help, because they have lots of opinions and no stake in the game. And product teams often cite a few different reasons for this. One is, time pressure. We're under time pressure, and it'll add time to the schedule. And they think that this is a good way to save time. Most projects have some sort of budget pressure, and they think, oh, this would be a good way to save money by not doing some of this work. But in many cases, actually, companies are just uncomfortable showing in-process work to customers or to external audiences. And part of it is they think it makes them look bad. A lot of times they don't want to show anything to the customer that now they're going to be calling every week to ask for, and many other reasons. They don't want to show a competitive advantage. But the reality is that folks need to find a way. So create some sort of group who is either comprised of some customers who aren't going to be annoying, or who are a proxy for a real customer, and really have them give you feedback. Because if it's just internal audiences, you're going to get off on the wrong foot. And even though people cite cost advantages and other things, most companies do not acknowledge the cost of doing things incorrectly or getting them wrong. A Forbes study from a few years ago estimated that just fixing UX issues was a $75 billion per year issue for companies. So again, I'll cite another number at the end that's much larger, but this is just issues related to it doesn't work exactly like it's supposed to, or it's not, whatever. So, and if we adjust that for inflation, I don't even know what we're talking about now. So if you build software from this inside out approach, by starting with the internal only vision of how things should work versus a user first, context aware, outside in approach, the final product that you produce has a very high likelihood of some level of failure. And at the very least, you've spent a lot of time building out core functionality that probably no one's going to use. And so if you want to really save money, don't build all the things in your head. Build one thing that you think we can start with, and then decide later how to add on to that. So a project that we worked on that really shows the benefit of actually getting into the field, in this case, a literal cornfield, was for a portable nitrogen testing station. And so when we came, they had a fully functioning R&D version of this, and it had an embedded computer with a touchscreen on it. And the folks that worked with this every day and helped to design this thing, they loved the interface. It was super efficient and fast, and they knew where all the buttons were. But the company knew that if they were to make this, to launch this product to the public, they were going to have to make the user interface a lot more friendly, a lot more usable. So they hired us and tasked us with helping out. And we ended up building an iPad app that, via Bluetooth LE, directly operated this machine. One of the things that we learned when we went out into the field was that some of the folks that were testing this out were using 4 machines in parallel. From the safety of our office, we would never have imagined someone would buy 4 of these machines, because the cost estimate for it was really high. But time is money for them, and they wanted to get through a lot more fields in a day, so they wanted to run 4 in parallel. And so, the difference between a single station and navigating through this complex series of steps versus multiplying that by 4 really is significant. It required us to rethink some aspects of our wireframe. A quick example that a lot of us are familiar with, if you went to the ATM, you'd be unlikely to leave that sort of mid-transaction, just walk away. You stick with it until you get your money and your card back, and then you leave. And so, consequently, the user interface doesn't have to do a lot of handholding. Like, you don't need to be reminded where you were, and you don't need to be reminded what's next. It's, I'm staying. But if you were going to withdraw money from 4 different ATMs all at the same time, and you were running between the 4 of them, you'd very likely be a little bit confused every time you got to the station. Now, what am I doing here? What did I put the money in? And so that's the kind of issue we were thinking about with this person. And these machines were very complex. They had, you had to calibrate the sensor, you had to add water from the machine, and there was a little dirt and water mixer that you put this thing under. So there's multiple steps over several different minutes. And so if we didn't remind them where they were, what they were doing right now, and what was next, they would have to spend some time sort of reacclimating every time they moved to a new station. And then for users who are only just using one machine, a lot of them too would set the thing on to calibrate and then walk away and do something else and then come back. And so even if you weren't running 4 machines, this type of user interface focus on helping them to quickly reacclimate to where they were was usable for everybody. So once we've collected and compiled our observations, now we can make these sort of informed recommendations about how the information is going to be organized, how the choices are presented, which workflow makes sense, and even talking to the teams about which subset of features would probably make a good MVP. So, getting into the field is really beneficial, but it's not without hazard. A couple of years ago, we were at a company that was moving from a manually actuated drive to a computer-aided drive-by-wire system. And so I got onto the vehicle that had this prototype on it. And the drive-by-wire was supposed to correct for users doing weird things with their hands. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it was like set incorrectly or if I just can't drive, one or the other. But as I was moving on this machine, I almost ran over the person that was helping me with the demo at least 2 times, maybe even more than that. So. And there may or may not be a video of this thing that gets shared. Yeah. So one of the important takeaways for us is that these early assumptions that companies make, or people make about what the product should be and what the functionality should be. Yeah.
There's a question online. Is it okay if we ask the question now?
Absolutely.
So the question was, can you list those 4 things again? I think the first is to talk to real users.
Yeah.
Someone's trying to take them.
No, that's totally fine. And the second is, yeah. Test out ideas before development, design systems for flexibility, and build systems iteratively. I can repeat this at the end too. So again, that's the end of that first section, but our goal there is always to create products that our core audience will instantly recognize, like, oh, this is for me, this makes sense to me. And a lot of folks fall into the trap of making things that make sense to the internal audience, people who are making. So in testing out ideas before development, it's a principle that really is thinking about reducing the overall risk to your project, both from time and budget and failure. And the main thing is to shift a lot of the costly and hard to change decisions that people make on some of these projects as far into the project as we can. Because a lot of these decisions really are made at the very beginning. What's the platform? All of these different things, without really having a sense for how the users are going to adopt it, how they're going to use it in practice, and other things. And so a lot of companies actually believe in this and talk about this and try this out. A lot don't start early enough, and many, many more don't kind of keep that process going further in development. So end to early. Oh, we tested it out. And from a market perspective, people seem to be responding to this product. So now we're going to take it back inside and just assume that we know what the product mix is and build it. So an approach that we recommend is sort of represented by what's called the cone of uncertainty. Many of you might have seen this. It's one of the few graphics I have, but basically on the one end it's big and on the other it's small. And at the big end, we know very little about the product, and the other end is where we actually are launching the product. And so, most folks are making some of these big decisions at this very, very far left end, where we know the least about the product, we know the least about the market, we know the least about the users. And so by using some low cost or lower cost options, we really have a chance to test out some assumptions about, here's our idea, let's actually see how it works in practice. Let's get some level of prototype in front of some kind of user and just see how they're reacting to. And the amount of learning just from those simple interactions is immense. So what does this look like practically? So for one of our clients, we were developing sort of a visual prototype. It did have some functionality in the back, but mostly it was just a false front. And so what they wanted to do is to test out this new product, and it's this drive-by-wire product. And they're a 40-year-old manufacturing company. They hadn't really done software internally, and so it was a new area for them. And so they, again, were moving from this manually actuated to computer-based product. And an important segment of this particular market was the dealer and repair shop, because they were the ones that tuned these machines and would repair them if they fixed. And so they were all set up with years of knowledge about how to do this with sort of manual stuff, but none of them had the capability to do this with a computer-based system. And so what we were building was a system that would allow them to diagnose and update the firmware and sort of figure out what's happening and other things. And so this company, by building this, we went to an industry event, and we pulled aside 5 different people that they had pre-selected and kind of asked them to work with this and think about how they might use it. And unfortunately for us, what the company determined was that they weren't ready yet for the full level of software that we had imagined building, which at that point I think was either $750,000 or more that we'd estimated an entire project build. And so, this company, if this product is very successful, they'll eventually need to build some sort of platform like that. But they are in the moment in time where they're just working with their prototype to just see if they can better understand this market and where they need to build things to be successful. And the only downside for them is that they're putting an enormous amount of resources into this sort of prototype app, which really can't go the distance for them, can't scale up. But they were able to reallocate quite a bit of money, to that for that project. So another quick example is there's a startup in Champaign. Actually, I think they're moving out of Champaign, but they're called Psionic, and they do this really innovative bionic touch-sensitive hand for amputees, and they work with a lot of vets. And they needed a custom UI to sort of interact with and to change some of the settings on the hand, because they imagined they'd be working with doctors, and those doctors would need to be able to sort of make some changes and tune this thing up. But thinking about the cost of that and other things and the need for it at the moment, they decided they really didn't want to allocate a ton of money to building out this whole UI. So they had a bunch of student interns, and they hired us to mostly be like a high level person to keep them from going off the rails and doing some stuff that'd be really crazy. But what I found really interesting was, by not focusing on building out what they imagined would be needed for these doctors, they started to incorporate some of what would have been in a configuration app directly into the product itself. So instead of having to teach the hand via programming what to do, they sort of figured out how to allow the user to do different things with the hand, so they could program it and customize it without having to use an interface at all. And by sort of forestalling the decision to build out this particular configuration app, it really sort of allowed them the freedom to think about some other options with how to do configuration. And I found that really fascinating.
You want to wait for questions?
No, please.
So what you're talking about here is the desire path, right? The idea that, if you had, imagine a field, and then you put pavements, but everybody's going to take the shortcut. So then the question is, how do you know when you should go with pre-planning and trying to create something, or do you take the desired path and let people kind of figure out their way?
It's a great question.
Because it's also hard, right? Like you talk about the thing with the scanner.
Yeah.
How did you know that you should put a pop-up in there? Because there could be a million other things that,
Yes.
red lights or, the thing with the blinking light that says there's no connection.
Yep.
There's so many varieties of opportunities, especially in not just the software space, but in the combination of software and hardware.
Yeah. No, that's a lot easier to answer than your first one, so I'll answer that question. So how do you decide what to do? And one of the principles of UX, and with UX, we're really focused on qualitative information gathering rather than quantitative. So we're really thinking about what are we learning from the folks. And so we think it takes, between 5 and 6 people who represent a certain type of user to start to hear some of the same themes over and over again. So so about 5 users, maybe 6, we start to see themes that are coming through all of those interviews. And really, what it is can you just show us how you use the current thing? And they go and they talk, but then they will make an offhanded comment. Oh, maybe it's not working. Sometimes this thing breaks. So then we ask the person from, who's running the program, they keep talking about it breaking. What is that? Oh, well, they think it's breaking. So it's really, it's hard to, if we had asked them at the beginning, what features does this thing need? A status banner would never have come up, but only by being there and watching them actually try to use these products and just sort of being around and hearing how they talk about things, we start to key in on some frustrations and other things. And those are the areas where really we see the most opportunities. Because what's the whole goal of that app? That goal is not to sell them anything. It's not to whatever. They just want something that's fast and efficient and makes sense. And the only way that we know to make something fast and efficient is to understand what the person who's using it thinks is fast and efficient, right? So I can have my own ideas about what that means, but I'm not out in the sun half the day walking around trying to find a palette that's probably got split up. So this order is on 3 different sections and I'm trying to find it. That person has a very different idea of what efficiency means. And it is typically something that's spread out over a much longer time period than I would hope. And whatever. So I don't know if that was it. Yeah.
Well, that's just start.
Good. Yeah.
Well, please keep going. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wondered if I could ask another question, just kind of going on with that as you're talking about how you're building the applications. Because you say you go from really the user outside in, right? So I'm just wondering, are you kind of doing the whole UI and drawing either a wireframe or a piece of paper, or how are you doing that? And then do you do it all the way out, or do you do just a little bit and then go deep?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, and we've done them all different ways. And a few years ago, it would have been an easy yes. Like, we're going to do a wireframe and we're going to test out that wireframe with users, and then that's going to go to the software team. But there's a couple big problems with that. One is that it's agile development. So if you give somebody the full picture of what the thing is supposed to be at the beginning, you've kind of like shot yourself in the foot, because now they're expecting everything in that wireframe to be built. And halfway through the project, you might realize this is a dumb idea. Why, we don't need this feature. And so we've really shifted to doing just enough interviews to start to get the ball rolling, but really trying as much as possible to not do a separate wireframe, but actually, work in real software. And again, we're having to do a little bit of a tangle because we don't want to build something if it's going to be terrible. And so we need just enough research at the beginning to be able to understand, how to get onto the right path. But then from there, we try to keep things a little bit more in pace with the software development.
So you're doing a little bit of the UI and going deep.
Yeah, and really not focusing on not trying to build out all of the screens and everything ahead of time, so that we're sort of locked into a path, because now everybody sees it. Now everybody expects it to look
Well, I would think too, I mean, from my experience that I've had, is if you can get it there, do a little bit, go deep, then you can maybe have that piece that they can use. Right, and then you're going and developing another piece, right? So it's more of a-
Yeah, I mean, the fourth point is build iteratively, and that's actually, I don't even have to go through that because this is exactly what it is, right? Find the smallest thing you can build it, get it out, test it with users, get their feedback, and probably maybe do a few iterations on just that one piece until you're really feeling good about it. People like the one little thing that you've built, they're more likely to use it rather than a lot of software companies, particularly off-the-shelf software companies. Their bread and butter is promises, right? Oh, by Q2 we'll have this. By Q3 we'll have this.
They still want that.
You know, it's very
They made out functionality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But, so I would think, right? So if you're doing it in an agile, so you're basically totem polling based on value, right?
That's
all the
right.
different
That's
features.
right.
So
Exactly.
if you give them the most valuable feature first, and they see that value, it gives them that confidence to continue moving on with the project and with the next big chunk. And keep rearranging the priorities based on how things are changing in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the other downside is you build a feature that maybe only one or two people like, but now you're stuck with it, right? Because like that one or two customer doesn't want to like you to kill a feature, even though the other 95% of people are like, I hate that feature. Why is it cluttering up the UI?
I mean, what you're talking about works well for the user conversation with the app, right? That detail stuff. But the tricky bit for me is architecture never evolves inside a project, right? And so you have to gaze into the crystal ball when you start and say, okay, this is the kind of scale we're going to need. This is how, like for your thing, our software works differently. We don't have you're not connected to Wi-Fi. We have a queue of outbound changes and a queue of inbound changes. We just expect the Wi-Fi not to work all the time, right? But it's hard to bolt that stuff on at the 11th hour, right?
It is. Right, from a technology and architecture standpoint, you know, it's a much harder thing to change. And so again, by spending more and more of your time thinking about the user and how it's actually going to work, if you can forestall as many of those decisions as you can until you get something where you're like, okay, now we know what we're talking about. Now we know what some of the issues are going to be. We had a product a couple of years ago where they were going to be out in the field and we're trying to do machine to machine communication. And of course, like we know the Wi-Fi is going to be dropping, 5G may be there, maybe not. And, and we're talking about large amounts of data. So what's the worst thing possible is to build something that has to restart or wait. And so it's just like, well, every time you get 5G, it's going to restart this data upload, but then if it fails, it's got to like, and so, we had to build a system that could self-heal, that could remember where it left off and like auto-correct and then pick up from where it went, because we'd be screwed if we didn't design for low connectivity. Yeah.
Can you describe what your process is like engaging with customers who still, many if not most customers today, like that Q4, Q1, like don't know what I'm getting, the date I'm getting it, and if it takes longer than that, too bad on you.
Yeah. I mean, luckily for us, we don't build off-the-shelf software. Everything's custom. So we're dealing with one customer per project rather than 50. But expectation setting is perhaps for our line of work is probably the most important thing that we do. Telling people right up front whether or not this is in our expertise or it's not in our expertise. Danielle and I had a conversation today about a project, and it doesn't need any UI at all. It's just totally onboard chips and motors and stuff. And there's the 70-80% that we feel comfortable doing, and then there's the other stuff. So it's like we haven't done it, and setting those expectations about what our capabilities are, setting expectations about what to expect from a project team in terms of speed. It's vital, and so actually, it used to be we would pitch just an agile project, we think it'll take about this much amount of time and here's a budget. So we just get one big kind of big blank check budget. And it was really fun to write those because they took 10 minutes to write. But once the team actually got that contract and started to do it, there was no expectations applied to that. And so on the one hand, it seems like exactly what they were asking for, like just sell me an agile project. Well, here you go. But on the other hand, there was no way for the client to sort of gauge their expectations about what was going to be done and how long it was going to take and those kinds of things. And so now we've really focused on breaking these projects down into as much detail as we can and line item. So they're looking at a group of like, oh, here's the 10 things we're working on. They get to see about how much work that is.
So you have this drafted agreement, it says, here's what we're gonna do, here's our scope.
Yeah.
Of course the customer's like, well, how long is this gonna take? And
Yeah.
the answer is.
It depends.
My favorite. Next provider.
Yeah. I mean, typically we're thinking about, some simple math gets us to pretty close, right? It's this size of team, they have this kind of burn rate that they can commit to. If it'll take between, this number of months and this number of months, and it's usually not that far off. And the depends part is that these contracts are written specifically so that we can pivot and change, right? So a month or 2 months into the project, we could start pivoting and be in a very different path. But the original project, if we were to keep with it, it would fit within pretty close to that original budget and pretty close into that original schedule estimate. So
You schedule and you build in a range rather than a fixed date.
Yes.
Simple.
Yeah.
That's what I've seen.
Simplicity.
Yeah.
Right.
It was, we used to just give one prize, and now we really do. We not only give a range for the entire project, but that range is actually just a calculation of the range for every line item that we can imagine for this project. So everything has a kind of, we call a happy path and sad path, And so we don't, when we do a whole project estimate, we sort of back off maybe about the 75th percentile. Unless somebody's like, I can't spend any more money. It's just like, okay, the sad path, is our estimate. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, and that's definitely helpful. So you say 5 to 7 months. Okay, great.
Yeah.
5 months is what we prefer.
Yeah.
We would rather have it at 5 months. Can you do that in 5 months?
Yeah, so what we do, and actually this is what's been really helpful about the range, is that, we typically bid the 75th percentile, but if someone says, I'd rather spend the low end of this estimate or the low end of our time estimate, we can agree to that. What we've done internally is we aren't going to change the estimates that the engineering team has given to us, but within that range, we can agree to an amount within that range with the client, but that's a business agreement. That's not an engineering agreement. The farther you get to the low end estimate, we can agree to it, but it's the riskiest agreement. So it's the most likely to not hit it. So if we're going to say 5 months, and we told you 5 to 7 months, you're saying I'm willing to take the risk that we don't hit our agreed to 5 months. If you take the lowest end estimate of the entire project, there's just inherent risk that we're not going to hit that budget. And so either you're going to have to get rid of some features, forestall them for another thing, or come up with more money. But those kinds of things. So
you're saying you would flex timeline, you can't flex timeline, you flex scope.
Yep.
You can't flex scope.
Add revenue, add cost. Yeah.
Resources extra.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, the other thing that's critical in this though is that it's not just you delivering to the customer. The customer has to deliver all sorts of things to you.
Yeah.
And that part, managing that side of things is the hard part.
Yeah.
Because you gotta get an approval to do something. Well, they go on vacation for 2 weeks in the middle of your project, that's a problem, but they don't see it that way.
Definitely one of the biggest things with this part, and I hate, putting it back on the client, but sometimes you have to make them aware, hey, it's gonna take you 2 months to get through purchasing before we can even start, so
Right.
I'll do what I can.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this is why waterfall still exists, right? Because there are pluses to having a specification, quoting a specification and delivering on it. The catch is may or may not meet the customer's needs by the time he gets out, right?
That's right.
But it's a double-edged sword.
Do you work with both? Do you work with both waterfall and agile? Do you have some hybrid approach?
We typically do just agile. I mean, there's certain things like a website project, for instance. You know, it's kind of hard to do that agile. It's gonna have to have certain things, and there have to be there at launch typically. We've done a few more interesting things to kind of introduce some agile methodologies into website development, but mostly we're gonna do content strategy, we're gonna do information architecture and visual design, and then we're gonna do the build and
so how would you work with a client who is not familiar with agile? When you talk about expectation setting, they're very much in this world of waterfall and other methodologies.
Which most are.
Yeah.
Vast majority.
Yeah, there's no matter what project we're on, no matter how sophisticated or not, there's a lot of education that happens for every project. Unless someone just is very experienced with working with outside consultants, there's just a lot of things that are unique to the process and are surprising to most folks. And there's a lot of philosophical sort of like thinking through like why we do it this way and what the true benefit of it is. It's if you've never done an agile project before, it just seems scary and like you're gonna get screwed over by the client, right? But it's much better than being on time and on budget and completely wrong. Which is often the alternative. It's just like you have this thing and it's exactly the scope. But oftentimes too, what you'll see, you come up with the spec, you send it out, you get quotes, you go with the people who seem, like the most cost effective, and they produce it to scope. But actually, when you start to see early versions of it, you're like, we didn't think of this. We didn't think of status messages. I didn't realize we didn't define a screen in between here and there. How do we get from here to there? So you say, well, now that we see this, we need some different things. Well, it's going to be a lot more money. And I used to think it was just a way for them to make up because they low bid it and now they're going to make it. And there might be some of that, but I think actually a lot of it is if you're building and bidding to a defined scope, you're not thinking about the flexibility of that system. So you're just, everything's defined to that spec. And so now you're coming back to me and saying, hey, I want to change this system. Well, I haven't really built it to be able to pivot and change. I've really built it to hone in on this spec. And we bid it as such to really just do this efficiently. And so that's really where some of that comes. It's cheaper often, but the lack of flexibility, if you've gotten anything wrong, is sort of it blows that budget out of the water instantly. So
you guys utilize the role of Scrum Master on your side, and then you try
typically
to identify one on the customer side.
Typically, what we're trying to find is a product owner on the customer side. So many of you probably know, but they're working in some sort of backlog, like Jira is the common one, where we're breaking down together. Here's all the pieces and parts of this project that we're going to build, and the product owner is the one that's saying, here's the highest priority. Here's the most valuable thing. Here's some more information about this that I think is valuable as you build it. They call it grooming the backlog, right? So going through, because there's always going to be features and functions that somebody proposed that will never get built, but you can't just remove them from the backlog because who knows. So it's really about reprioritizing, moving things around. So that's really the client role on these agile projects, is to really sort of own the prioritization of what we're doing. We work in 2-week sprints. A lot of people do. Some work in 1-week sprints, some longer. But really, we come together at the beginning of that sprint. We decide, okay, here's what we're going to agree to. Here's the tickets that we're going to work on. We think, based on our burn rate, here's how many story points. I won't get too far into it.
Do you use Fibonacci?
A lot of times we do, yeah. Sometimes if we get a project that we know really well, people can just estimate hours. But yeah.
How do you engage with a customer who doesn't have a singular product out there?
That's tough. Our contracts are written so that some person in the contract has ultimate decision-making authority. We also write that if people who have opinions and can sway the project aren't there on day one, we have this big clause that says we might have to renegotiate. If you bring in new parties and new ideas late in a process, it's really going to mess up everything. That's to protect our clients too. So, yeah.
Another thing to remember is that there's more than one kind of Agile. Scrum Agile is what most people use, but a lot of people use Kanban Agile, which is more familiar to people who come out of the waterfall old way. And another possibility, which we do, is you do one waterfall quote and project for a prototype, and then you do another waterfall quote and deliverable for a final product. And those things all acknowledge, get the customer to understand that there's going to be a degree of change. You understand there's going to be a degree of change, but there has to be some way to manage that.
That's probably the best way to do it. I mean, that's what the hybrid is in a way that the one thing that waterfall is good at is keeping communications easy. That's its main purpose in some ways. It's like from the customer communication standpoint, everything is straightforward, simple. We know how to explain this. But if you break it down internally and then set up expectations saying that, hey, given you a waterfall, but be ready for change. And as long as they understand that, then I think there's always some room to keep moving or changing some of the expectations from one waterfall to the next waterfall. That it helps that.
And we've had customers pay for 3 waterfall prototypes happily because they did it. They kicked the tires. Their employees talked about it. And they said, "Well, no, we think this is an opportunity to change our process internally, right? So now we want something completely different." And in the end, they got a system and they're perfectly happy. They spent a lot of money, but they feel like they got something for that money, so they don't want to.
And that kind of brings me to the next question, which is, do you actually charge to go through the planning process? Do you actually do that, or what's that like?
It depends.
Because it's so much scope, right? To plan and work with them to build out what that could actually look like.
Actually, I'd be interested, Danielle, but it just depends on the project. There's sometimes when if someone's really new to software development, and they really can't get comfortable, green lighting a small discovery project. What we typically try to do is differentiate between, a few of us, like Danielle and I, coming together and trying to come up with some sort of plan and idea, and we do that, because that's what we find fun. But if we involve consultants in doing any kind of spec work or design work or whatever, that's where we would want to charge. So it's really how far do they want to go? Do they want just a good idea, or do they want to actually see something? If they really want to specify what's being produced and see, that's what we would do like a discovery process. So
actually just listened today, I was talking about, it was an app that they said, we need something improved, but we don't know, they didn't have enough goals defined. Can you help me? Well, we can, but that would be time with our consultants to really dig in and help you uncover a lot of things. So a very small, but to them it may not be small engagement. So if they're comfortable with that, then we would charge just do that piece, and they can decide what to do with that information afterwards.
Yeah, because the problem is they think they know what they want, but actually what they want in their head versus what comes on paper is completely night and day.
Well, customers are never process engineers, so that's the way it goes. They have this great vision, and I've designed things that are awesome. Unfortunately, they cannot be assembled. There is no way to put the screws in to do it. It's just not physically possible.
Sure.
Customers will design systems that are the same way.
Have you had any existing customers, brought in outside capital? And I think the flaws you talked about. Has that happened to you yet? Has that influenced the process?
I mean, just like investors?
Yeah.
Yeah, a few of the startups that we have worked with, they're all equity financed. So again, we're typically not dealing with that investment group. We're sort of like making them deal with that with that group. I mean, it would just be too hard to navigate for us. But yeah, so a lot of projects do have, are tied to that. And interestingly too, a lot of university projects that are grant funded, sort of where we get involved, and it's like we have to put something together so that they can put together kind of a pitch. So both on the startup end and on the grant cycle end, we're also helping people to figure out like what to ask for.
So most of your projects are already equity, like private equity backed or have VC funding of some sort.
I would say,
Tech projects.
yeah, about a third of our projects come out of like the higher ed, academia. Other third are established manufacturing companies that are kind of moving into some sort of digital space. And then the other third are these kind of more flexible startup kinds of companies. So the older companies are usually, they're just using existing capital to fund these projects. Universities are using grants or whatever. But typically companies have gotten their funding already, and now they're looking. Because companies, actually we were at OnRamp and talking to a number of startups, and if they haven't gotten funding, we'd love talking to them and mentoring them, but we're a long ways away from being able to help you because it's just too expensive. And companies, particularly equity, people who are financing these, they don't want to pay for someone to just build something. They want to pay to accelerate, right?
Yeah.
So they want to know that you have something worth investing in, and you just need money to speed up.
Right.
And that's where we can really come in, because it's a lot faster to hire us than just build an engineering team. So.
Especially startups can burn money
Oh,
so
yeah.
quickly that they'll pay somebody to get it done quickly in a heartbeat. Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you talk, and I'm gonna kind of change the topic here, but I'm curious about the UI, because I know there's, I worked in an engineering group, and one of the hardest things for the engineering group that did hardware, they built software, was the UI piece of it, to make it what we called sexy, right? So
yeah.
I mean, we could put a button on there, we could do this or that, but it didn't look like Apple, right? So is there a standard that because it seems to be almost like an art skill, and is there maybe a standard or something that can help? Somebody who's doing a UI say, hey, follow that standard, and they'll have something that comes out looking good.
There is there's something called Bootstrap. I don't know if you ever heard of that. So Bootstrap is other folks might be able to explain it better. But essentially, you can adopt a whole series of styles and buttons for any number of engineering frameworks. So you're working in Vue.js or whatever. I don't know if they have one for Agile, for Bootstrap, but they probably do. But you can get all these styles and just use these pre-existing styles. And it typically looks fairly basic, but we really differentiate between user interface design and visual design. So and even on a project where we're doing both, we try to split that role. So we have a UX researcher and a UI designer, because they're just very different ways of thinking about a problem. One is trying to make something look, good and help people to kind of wayfind using different visual techniques and make it look, on brand and good. And the UX person is not focused on any of those things. They're simply focused on how do I organize this interface so that we have the right priorities and that the workflow makes sense to whoever we're going to use. I mean, a great example of this, you guys have all seen this. You open up an interface, and every single thing that this app does is on the screen or available to you, And without a UX designer to say, let's think about the use case of this. Okay, out of 20 different things that this app does, 19 of them happen very rarely. And most things are going to happen with just this one. So let's build the app around this central function. This will be the home screen. This will be where, and so you're not wading through 19 things that you might occasionally do, never do, to get to the one thing that everybody's going to want to do. And so really UX is really thinking about that problem and not how it actually looks visually. But right, I think, and I've seen now Bootstrap where people go through and create whole new designs and then release them as a bootstrap thing. So you get some pretty nice looking things without having to have a designer on staff.
There's a third designer in there too, because the failing of engineers is we think of things in terms of capabilities. And so we've got to have a screen with all the capabilities on it. But a real designer will think in terms of tasks. What does someone want to do? What's the sequence of steps that they want to do? Because you may not be able to get to all those things immediately, but you need to get them in the performance of your whatever tasks you need to do.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's UX designers.
More like a workflow.
Yeah, well, what's the goal? I mean, when you built that app, you had this whole goal in mind, right? It's probably revenue generation at some level, or or revenue system. You're trying to get that user, your customer, to do something. So what is the thing that you want them to do? And how can I make it really easy to do the thing that I want them to do? And so that's really sort of starting from the goals. What are we trying to accomplish? Then let's understand the user. Let's really get in and understand, how do they solve this problem today? That's the best question you can ask. We're trying to get them to do it this new way. How are they, because it's a problem today already, I hope. How are they solving that problem today? And watching them solve that problem. And then informing how we build our thing. Not based on like what we're trying to get them to do, but how they're already solving it.
So the output of that user experience person is which probably stops at the wireframe. It does not go beyond that.
We try to keep them staffed on a project as long as possible.
Sure.
Just because, the user experience testing is a really key part of this. So you build the small thing, you get it out, and then having a UX person actually run the testing. There's a couple of benefits. One, they use methodologies that are really helpful. But two, if people know you built this thing and you ask them to evaluate it, they're going to give you a really sunny answer. Okay, they're going to say, "Oh, this looks great." And so, one of the very first things that a UX usability testing person said, because we write a script for this test, and one of the very first lines for most of these is, "I didn't build this. There's nothing that you can say that will offend me." Because they really just, and then it starts to, okay, now I'm really just trying to help you understand this. And so, having UX further into that. I talked with a company a while ago where they were doing a usability test every week. It was a K-12 product, so they had just a couple classrooms, and so every week they were releasing new code. Every week they were going out and saying, "Hey, can I watch you use this?" Run through a couple usability tests, that kind of thing, and informing the next sprint. Here's what we're hearing, here's what we're seeing, kind of thing. So
It's pretty expensive for the question.
it does, but again, the cost of doing it wrong is immense, right?
That's the part that that's the part that is easy to ignore.
It's so easy. Whereas, line item, we had a bad market fit. There's so many reasons why a product can fail, right?
So do you then say, hey, if you'd done it this way, we estimate that you would spend 10x versus.
I wish I was that smart. We had one company, we've been working with them for a couple of years, and they wanted to know like 10-year cost. And it really hurt our brains. We came up with something, but it was really hard to do. But it's actually a little vignette I was telling them about. So about 5 or 6 years ago, they decided, you know what? We have this homebrew system, and we don't want to keep investing in it. It's just, it's gotten old, and there's all these off-the-shelf systems out there. We're just going to move to some sort of off-the-shelf system. Great. And so their engineers, who they had 3 at the time, they heard that, they're like, okay, fine, you're gonna migrate away from this. So when a recruiter called, they're like, oh, okay, I'll take that call, whatever. And so over about 1.5 years, they lost their entire engineering team because they basically forecasted we're gonna get rid of this system eventually. And in their mind, it was maybe a couple of years or whatever, but so now we got called in because they had no engineering team. And so we've been supporting them. It's not a really standard project for us, but we've been supporting them now for about 4 or 5 years. And for that entire time, we've been saying, stop just giving us money to keep this thing going. You take the amount of money that you would spend on this, like maintaining, and allow us to put some effort into making this thing better and more usable. Adamant against it. And like about a year or two ago, they're like, no, we're certainly going to go off the shelf system. So I'll report back in 2025. We'll see.
Sorry, we already know what the answer is.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's such a good example of throwing good money after bad, right? I don't want to invest in a brand new custom system. Well, you're spending way more money to keep the old thing going than you would be in a new system. We actually did about a year ago, we got them to take one tiny baby step, which is that they had an external system they wanted to incorporate. And this old spaghetti code thing that they had was never gonna so we're like, okay, well, if you want to incorporate that, we've got to build this little module that can communicate between the two. Okay, we can do that. Again, how much is the whole thing going to cost? And again, we try to be as transparent as possible. So it was an unfathomably high number. But it's what they're going to spend. It's just no one likes to know that that's what they're going to spend, and so we'll try to reject it.
What other questions there we have? Any in the room? Any online, guys?
No questions from me. I just appreciate the meeting and everybody just going ahead and honestly bouncing ideas off each other to figure something out. That's what it's for. So again, I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Elijah. That was great. Thank you. I do. Okay. Well, if there's not any more questions, Gabriel, did you want to have a question? I just asked.
No, I also want to express appreciation for your time and expertise and getting to know, what is going to be experienced when you're a lot deeper into this field.
We're so sorry.
No, go ahead, Gabriel. It's okay. It's okay.
I also have to admit that I had a little family emergency during the thing, so I didn't get much further than like the first quarter of it. So, but yeah, it was what I did here was really insightful and useful. So thank you.
For sure.
Great.
Danielle and I talked about doing this as another webinar so I could sort of encapsulate it, because I love the questions. So this was much more fun for me. But I'll try to do one where it's just the content and put it out there. People like,
yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
With the video.
Yes.
With the video. Yeah. Yes, for sure. I'll include the video.
Well, I'm so glad you guys were able to come here in person.
Yeah.
Which is great. We had a couple
Thanks.
others that came that were in person as well from long distances. But thank you very much. I very much found this very enlightening, and it's good to hear kind of some of the same, the experiences they've gone through and the different lessons learned, which are great, right? So we can start small, start from the outside, go in, deliver a little bit, but iterate,
That's all I did.
Yeah, it's still progress, but thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody online. You guys have a great night, and please come back.
Will do.
All right.